Alright, so today we're going to talk about the cycles of matter. So matter on Earth is limited. So because of this, it has to be recycled. So we don't create it or destroy it, we recycle it. And that's what the law of conservation of mass says. So we are going to talk about 4 cycles that we're going to learn about. So the water cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, and carbon cycle. The first of those is going to be the water cycle. The water cycle is the movement of water between the oceans, the atmosphere, land, and living things. And you can see all of that over here in this picture. There are 3 main processes involved in the water cycle. The first is evaporation. So evaporation is the process where liquid water changes into water vapor or a gas. And this occurs as the sun heats Earth's surface water up. So the water gets warmer, it becomes a gas, and it rises up into the atmosphere. It also can go through a process called transpiration. So if it's evaporating from the leaves and stems of the plants, then we call that transpiration. Once that water is in the atmosphere, it's going to go through the process of condensation. So the water vapor is going to change into liquid water during condensation because it cools off. Condensation is also what forms clouds. And so once that water gets heavy in the clouds, then we are going to have this process called precipitation. So during precipitation, the water is going to fall from the clouds to Earth's surface. So precipitation can be rain or snow or sleet or hail. When that precipitation falls, it's going to enter water bodies or soak into the soil, depending on where it lands and what it does. So those are the 3 main processes in the water cycle. The next cycle is the nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen cycle is the movement of nitrogen between the environment and living things. Nitrogen is really important for living things because it helps us build proteins, which is what all of our body structures basically are made out of. And then it also helps us it's a building block of DNA. One of the troubles with nitrogen gas is that in the air, there's lots of nitrogen in the air, but it can't be used by plants and animals. So it has to go through this process called nitrogen fixation, where it's changed to make it usable. Nitrogen fixation can be done by nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil and by lightning. And so those 2 things change that nitrogen so that it can be used by plants and animals. Plants use the fixed nitrogen, and then animals get nitrogen by eating plants. When those things die, or when the animals excrete their wastes, so they poop or pee, the nitrogen gets returned to the soil. So that was the nitrogen cycle. The next cycle is the oxygen cycle. Now, most living things need oxygen for cellular respiration, and this oxygen cycle is an important part of many other, it's necessary for other substances like carbon dioxide and water as well. So the oxygen cycle is this movement of oxygen between the plants who use it for photosynthesis, the atmosphere, and then the animals that use it for cellular respiration. So what happens is the plants take in the carbon dioxide and release oxygen into the air through photosynthesis. Then animals and other organisms take in the oxygen from the air and use it to make energy, and then they release carbon dioxide through cellular respiration. And so then that process just keeps on going and going. Our next cycle is the carbon cycle. And all organisms contain carbon, so that's one of the really important things about life, is that all life contains carbon. And so the carbon cycle is the movement of carbon between the atmosphere, the soil, and plants and animals. Photosynthesis, again, is one of the really important processes within this carbon cycle. So again, those plants use the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And then animals eat those plants and get the carbon. Another way that animals can get carbon is through respiration. So carbon dioxide gets returned to the atmosphere when organisms use oxygen to make energy. So they breathe and they use that oxygen, and then they breathe out the carbon dioxide. Carbon can be returned to soil and the atmosphere through decomposition. So when something dies and gets broken down, some of the carbon gets returned to the soil, while the rest of the carbon gets turned into carbon dioxide and then is released back into the atmosphere. And then finally, the last process that we're going to mention here within the carbon cycle is combustion. So combustion is just the burning of substances such as fossil fuels, which releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So anytime you burn something, you're going to release carbon dioxide, and it's going to return to the atmosphere. So those are the cycles of matter.